Hi, everyone. My name is Micheal Gilberg. You know me as an autistic blogger of my own blog website, The World of Autism. I've had some really exciting things that have happened lately. One big achievement of mine is that I recently passed an exam to become a registered behavior technician. So I will be starting real soon of providing ABA therapy to autistic clients. So everybody has known me as a paraprofessional. I've worked for years with students with disabilities, and now I'm branching out myself with working in the ABA field. So I'm really excited about that coming up. But right now we have a really special guest that's on here, and his name is Michael. How you doing, Michael?
Thanks, Michelle. Nice to meet you. I mean, not meet you. We've spoken before. Nice to be on. Sorry.
No problem. No problem.
Just a long holiday weekend.
Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah. With the holiday weekends usually like messes things up with everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's go right into it. I didn't want to tell too much about yourself because you are such a special person. I thought it'd be good to hear about with you from your perspective.
Sure, Michelle. Thanks again for having me. As I said, my name is Micheal Gilberg. I'm a special education attorney, also on the spectrum myself, and I represent children in special education proceedings. Again, when they're challenging the school district or the families are for services, placements, and they don't feel their child is getting the appropriate education to meet his or her individual needs.
Wow. And what since that, I'm wondering what inspired you to go pursue to be a special education lawyer? Because I know when it comes to, I know with my own family, I have cousins, and even my own brother is pursuing to be a lawyer. So what inspired you to pursue of being a special education lawyer?
Well, growing up, I didn't get the appropriate education that I should have gotten. As my mother always says, you know, they knew I was smart, I had the ability, but unfortunately, they didn't know what to do. And it was the early 80s. I'm 44. And when I was growing up, everybody thought of autism as the kid sitting in the corner banging his head against the wall, not people who were smart or verbal. And so there was a lack of understanding, and they diagnosed me hyperactive, all these other things that were not correct. And it wasn't until I got to college that I really got what I would call an appropriate education. And I had to fill in the gaps for myself in a way that the schools hadn't. And unfortunately, because of that, you know, not everybody has, not to sound arrogant, not everybody has my ability to do that. And so some people are not, most students are not going to catch up themselves. I filled the gaps on my own, but I just realized this was the best place for me, given my skill set. I could be a great advocate. I was not going to be somebody who probably worked directly with, you know, people on the spectrum. I mean, I do, but not with children. I wanted to help children like you do, but I wasn't going to be somebody who worked directly the way you do. It was a better fit for me to do this. My mother always said, even when I was little, she thought I'd be a lawyer. She might have been onto something. And so I realized I went to law school, not sure totally what I wanted to do, but then I realized this was the area of law.
Oh, wow. And yeah, when it comes to like with the education system, it's changed like drastically from your time to now because of the fact there's so much more understanding about with autism and with other disabilities in general. And just with the, like, even from my own view, from what
you're in your early 20s, correct?
What?
You're in your early 20s, correct?
I am.
Yes. Yeah, so you're about 20 years younger than me. So it was better when you went to school, but then I would say even the kids today are getting stuff that the people your age did not have access to.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I'll give you an example when it comes to in the classroom, like I've worked with children on the spectrum who are using assistive technology to be able to communicate. That did not exist when I was learning to communicate. Like for me, I was learning to communicate through like PECs or.
Right. You were still, I would assume, slightly in the before internet age. The technology wasn't there.
Oh, no.
I mean, I didn't use a computer until I was a teenager regularly. The computers they had when I was in school growing up were not those kind of computers. They were like the Apple IIc. We played Oregon Trail. It was very dated when you compare it to today. Fortunately, I never had communication deficits. As my mother would always say, I was pre-verbal.
Right. And that's what the beauty about with autism, about how much of a spectrum it is, because everybody has different abilities and like strengths and challenges. And it's just like every time whenever I do these guest interviews, like everybody has such a has a unique story.
Well, as my friend and the noted autistic Stephen Shore, I'm sure you've heard of him, says, you've
Yes.
met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. You can't say everybody with autism is the same. And I think you and I were talking about this before, that the fact that, you know, everybody's experience is different. And what works for you might not work for me, and vice versa. And I think one big issue, and I think we were discussing this, is how ABA is so controversial. ABA is so controversial, and so many self-advocates are anti-ABA, and you've had a different experience with ABA.
Yeah, it comes from the education, like how much research has changed about with ABA, and also people's experiences themselves. So there's always going to be some kind of debate about it. There will always be like that, because like it just depends on the experience, like the actual experiences people have, and the education about with ABA itself. Because for me as a
Right.
college student, now I've learned a lot more, that I think that there's information that people did not know about.
Right, and I will say this: I have, you know, I serve on the Council of Advisors for the Autism Society nationally. We were very pleased, to give you a little plug, that you contributed to our recent ABA town hall.
Yes, it was a wonderful town hall to be part of, and that was back in February. And I really enjoyed being on it and sharing my perspective and everything. I appreciated that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go back to like about with the education system, as a fact that like,
And I apologize that I'm trying to multitask. It's always the life of an autistic. And
yeah, no problem. No problem. That's, you know what, as I've said it, like these things, like it becomes natural, just like
right.
it does here. So
I sometimes have to tell people I don't have an eye contact problem, because with the computer, I'm looking at two screens, so it looks like I'm not making eye contact, but I am.
yeah, no problem. No problem. So I want to transition back to where we were talking about with the education system, and especially with the law, like with special education laws, because as you mentioned earlier, how it's different in like with a college setting versus a K through 12 setting, which is true. And so I wanted to ask you, like, what are some special education laws that families should know about? Because
Well, the main law is the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and that covers most special ed law. And that's the law that every child, regardless of disability, is a free and appropriate public education to the maximum extent possible for his individual needs.
and when it comes to that law, like, have you ever faced like with families that like that their school district is going against it?
Wait, repeat the question. Sorry.
The question is that based on like that law, you know, that law that you mentioned,
The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
yes, that like when would it be necessary for families to reach out to a special education lawyer like yourself?
If they want their child outplaced into a private placement, not a public school, then to meet these disability needs, if they feel the child isn't getting service properly within the public school environment, if they feel the child needs more services, different services, is not getting special ed and should be, or if there's in many cases bullying. I've been getting a lot of bullying cases lately.
I've heard a lot about with bullying cases have been rising.
Particularly for autistic children.
I've heard that's to be the case, especially the way that schools are handling it. there still needs to be more advocacy with that. Yeah.
So I have a particularly egregious case I'm taking to federal court, actually, where the kid was bullied. It's on tape, it's merciful, and the school's position is he brought it on himself. He should learn to be normal. It's a very bad district, and they've had a history of bullying, but specifically that this is the position by some of the schools. Well, if the kid didn't irritate his peers, they wouldn't have to bully him.
Yeah, that's a case where I think for a lot of school districts need to know is the fact that, you know, you have to understand the individual themselves, and that, you know, that, and also about with autism. Like, I feel like from that standpoint, it's telling me that they don't understand enough with the child's disability, and the fact that just the individual themselves, like, they didn't take that into consideration at all.
Right, and so often schools don't get it, and they don't understand it.
Yeah, that's why you know, when it comes with me working, like for me working in the school districts, that's what I try to make a difference of, especially like with children that I've worked with. Like, I help advocate for them. Like for what a really huge goal of mine this year, which I felt so proud about, was with the student that I work one-to-one with, who's in a general education setting, and trying for them is to achieve inclusion. And the fact that there was peers who wanted to be with my student, like to support him and everything. It was huge.
Right, and very often we lose the issue on inclusion. So many schools don't actually understand how to do proper inclusion. And they think that because the child's in a typical classroom, he's included. But if he's sitting in a corner by himself, he's not really included. And that's what I always try to remind people, is that inclusion is not just putting the child, in a typical classroom. The child has to have the ability to interact with his peers. If you put a nonverbal child in a classroom full of not verbal peers and they don't know how to interact with him, then you're not really including that child. So the idea of this, under the law, students are supposed to be in what's called the least restrictive environment, and that is often misunderstood as the public school, and that's not always the case.
Yes, I've heard about that, especially like when it comes to the least restrictive environment. Like, I hear too many people that I understand that you're trying to push your child, and I've heard this a lot from parents whenever I've done keynote speeches. I've heard so many parents that say that like they want to push their child into a public school district in the general education setting. I get that. But they have to have the skills, like social skills, interaction with other people, you know?
Right.
Like,
right. A kid who goes into the public school and starts hitting his peers and he can't interact with them because he's a little violent is not going to be in the least restrictive environment.
No. So that's why, you know, you have to take into consideration about those kind of supports that are needed, you know. But they're at the same time of still trying to get into that least restrictive environment, but
it's least restrictive for that individual student. And a common mistake is that the least restrictive environment is always the public school. Where I think this is most prone, it's not noticeable, it's not even in autism. The deaf students have their own culture, and there are a lot of deaf schools because they live in their own culture. And I think because of the deaf culture, it's an example for autism. Most autistic kids like us should have been in the public school, but autistic kids who are either going to be such behavioral issues or have such communication deficits, there's often a need to put them in schools where they can work on those things.
Which I'll give a personal example for me. That's how I went through it. That was exactly how I went through it. I started out in a specialized school in New Jersey. It was for autistic students and with students with multiple disabilities because of the amount of support that I needed at the time. And then when I acquired enough skills and everything, that's when I transitioned into my public school district in my town, in my hometown at the time. So
right.
that's how parents need to consider that for their child, that of their supports.
Right. And it's very often, then the other thing is very often a lot of parents will say to me, look, I don't know what my child needs. I'm not the expert. They count on the school to tell them the right thing.
Unfortunately, that's still the case. I hear this like all the time, and it just like, that's why I'm like, you have to like really pay attention to your child, especially like what's going on with school and everything, because you know that's still an issue. It really still is an issue.
Right.
It still is an issue.
We
But
still have issues with so many people who don't know how to help, how to work with autistic children.
yeah, and that's that's what we're trying to make. Like, I know with the ABA company I work with full spectrum ABA, lately we've been having discussion forums where the autistic providers actually work with full spectrum's providers, behavior analysts, RBTs, and we're actually like talking about so many skills that when it comes to them approaching their autistic clients, because
Right.
best way to learn is actually from people who are on the spectrum. Like that's how you're going to be able to provide like quality care and everything. It's not just like research and stuff. You need to like be out there and like listen to the voices.
Well, that's the
you know?
point. Very often, the autism world has been decided by people who are not actually on the spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's been incredible to see more voices coming out, and that's what I try to do with here on the World of Autism. I try to get more voices out there because this is what we need.
Right. Well, and I think one of the other issues is very often people say to me, oh my God, it's so surprising you're a lawyer. And they don't know that there are many autistic lawyers out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to in the ABA field, there's plenty of autistic people who are behavior therapists and analysts. So
And I'm finding more autistic BCBAs, which is a big thing, because like I said before, and we've discussed, you and I, there's so much controversy about ABA and behaviorism within the autism community.
yeah. Yeah. And it it's just, it's people gotta focus on the facts. That's what needs to be focused on, not as much of opinion, more on the facts.
Right. And again, you need as you said, people who have the lived experience. Just like, we talk about, and it's always been interesting to me that I think in society, we think about racial equity, gender, sexual orientation, but disability still is different. It's still less about the people who actually have lived it.
Right. And that's what
And people see it less as an issue. It's not as noted it's not as something commonly known for these things as those other affinities.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's people still need to consider with that. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to wrap this up with one last thing to ask you is about what advice that you have for autistic people pursuing to be lawyers.
I think the best thing for an autistic person is take the LSAT, go to law school, make sure you really want to do it. It's a big commitment, financially, time-wise, and just emotionally, but you can do a lot of good. I think the main thing is if you do want to be a lawyer and you're on the spectrum, don't let people tell you you can't. The only limitation is honestly, if you have, it's even if it's not even I've seen lawyers with communication deficits. I think the only thing is that you can intellectually do the rigorous work, if that makes sense, because
Yeah.
it will be a lot of rigorous work.
Yes.
But don't let people tell you because you're autistic you can't be a lawyer.
Exactly.
We have been having more and more lawyers show up in the world who are autistic, and in fact, it's becoming quite the growing area of law. And I've been very active in the Lawyers with Disabilities movement, and it's been a huge thing in this world.
That's amazing. That is
To
so
have more lawyers with disabilities of all kinds, blind, deaf, intellectual, not intellectual, blind, deaf, autistic, ADHD, obviously lawyers in wheelchairs, just everything.
Wow, that's amazing. That is truly amazing. Think from back then to like now, how much more of the community is just like coming out and everything of so many like lawyers. You got in the ABA field, you got in the education
Where's what?
field, you name it.
Michelle, you froze.
Okay, so I was saying that.
I'm sorry, I don't know how this can affect your recording. You just froze for a minute.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. Anyway, I was saying that about how there's so much of the disability community that has come out to be like so many different career routes, from lawyers to in the education field as teachers to ABA therapists. Like it's truly incredible.
It's been a real change in the world, all for the better too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it truly has been all for the better. Very
Yeah,
true.
I mean, again, the old disability phrase, nothing about us without us.
You got that right. You got that right.
That's
Michael,
always,
right.
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good. Michael, I want to thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with you. I think a lot of people are going to take into consideration, like from school districts to families, about what's been going on in the world today. And I think there's a lot more that still needs to be advocated for. So I really appreciate that.
Especially in this world now where we're in like this COVID world where so much more mental health is becoming apparent.
Absolutely. So definitely like coming together as a community and providing support is key.
Exactly.
It is key. So just for everybody else to know, if you've been enjoying these guest interviews, you can check them out on YouTube. And you can also follow me as Exceptional Shell on at Self Advocate MV on all my social media accounts on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, you name it. So and you can also subscribe to my blog website, The World of Autism. So thanks so much for watching, everyone.